Warm greetings. Welcome to today's session of Monday Munching and Musing with Women for Water. This session is conducted with the support of Water Resources Council of the Women's Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and in collaboration with W4W Foundation and our media partner Counterview. My name is Mansi Bal Bhargav and I'm currently holding the position of National President of the Wiki Water Resource Council, as well as I'm also the founding director of W4W Foundation. Today in this session, we are here to listen and know more about Vishal Narain, Dr. Vishal Narain, and a good friend. He's a professor at MDI Gurgaon. He holds a PhD from Wageningen University in the Netherlands. His academic interests are in the interdisciplinary analysis of public policy processes and institutions, water governance, gender rights, and equity in water management, peri-urban issues, and vulnerability and adaptation to climate change. He is author of The Public Policy of View from the South, and many more publications. He has co-edited Water Security in Peri-Urban South Asia, Adapting to Climate Change and Urbanization, Indian Water Policy at the Crossroads, and many more, as I just mentioned. I mean, he's one of the person I would really like to look up to when I talk about water matters, and particularly looking at the gender matters. He's been a consultant as advisory at various organizations across India and world. So welcome to Monday Munching and Musing, Vishal, and we are really excited to have you in our session and eager to hear and learn from you, your worldview about the subject. So I'm really happy.
Thank you.
So shall we go ahead and
Yes.
shall I start with questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you, Mansi. Thank you so much for having me here and look forward to talking to you. Yes.
So first thing first, you are also invited because you are part of our advisory to the Wiki Water Resource Council, which is at a nascent stage. So we really seek guidance and support to take it further and have a good mass of women presence in the water sector. But keeping that aside, we will talk about it towards the later part of the discussion. The question and answer or interaction is based on three broad sections here. The first section is about knowing Vishal as a human being and his association with water. And then the second part is presence of women and participation of women in the water sector. And the last part is on women leadership in the water sector. So let me start with the section one. And it's a little bit of soft question. And we would like to know, how did Vishal start his journey in the water sector? When was it you really felt that I belong here and I'm going to be here forever? And it can be any time of a moment in your life. Over to you. Thanks again.
Okay. Thank you, Mansi. So, yeah, I think that's a good opportunity to reflect on my own journey with the subject and my engagement with the subject. So I think my interest in water actually started when I joined my first position. That was in 1995 as a research associate at what was then called Tata Energy Research Institute, TERI. We now know it as the Energy and Resources Institute.
Yes.
And my first project and assignment there was a project called Green India, Growth with Resource Enhancement of Environment and Nature. And where the idea was to look at, what has happened to India's natural resources over 50 years of planned economic development, what are the stresses, what are the pressures, and what kinds of, corrective action is in place and what more needs to be done. So I think that's when my work on water actually started. And my first paper was called Towards a New Groundwater Institution for India. That was published in 1998 in Water Policy. And always your first paper is the one you're most excited about.
Yes.
And then, of course, after that, you do it, you still enjoy publishing. You also do it as part of your professional commitments. But it's always the first journal paper that really gives you a kick. So I still remember. So that was in 1998. But I think that the real consolidation of my interest in water took place during my PhD at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And that's when my whole, grooming as a water researcher took place. My whole, what we call developing your way of looking at water or developing your perspective on water, how you see things. So I think it was that PhD phase from 1999 to 2003 that was really instrumental in shaping my interest in water, both in terms of what kinds of questions I like to investigate, like, what kind of intellectual
Yes.
inquiries I like to do, but also in terms of methods. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole approach of developing an orientation towards ethnographic studies of water.
Yes.
Yeah. Which started my PhD days. And one of the things that I learned, Peter Molinga was my PhD supervisor. He was an immediate
I can
supervisor. And,
already
he
imagine
taught me
how
to walk on the
important.
canals,
Mm.
right? So he said that if you really want to study how irrigation happens, if you want to know what's going on, you have to walk on the canals. You have to be there when
Mm.
farmers are irrigating, right? So this
Mm.
whole perspective, this whole way of doing research in an ethnographic style, of immersing in the context. Yeah. So that was one. So I
Mm.
developed this flair for ethnographic work during my PhD
Mm.
days. One.
Mm.
Secondly was that, I came from a social sciences background.
Mm-hmm.
And I said that no, like I don't look at technology.
Mm.
That's not my cup of tea. Right.
Yes.
But
Huh.
I did my PhD in a program that was called Matching Technology with Institutions of
Uh-huh.
Land and Water Management. And
Huh.
that really pushed me out of my comfort zone. Yeah, as
Mm-hmm.
somebody who was trained in the social sciences, to look at technology. I mean, I did not make any claim to being an engineer or an expert, a natural science expert, but simply to understand that design matters. Like, for instance, when you
Yes.
think about governance, when you think about institutions, if you do it in a technological silos, yeah, you may come to the wrong conclusions. Yeah,
Mm.
or you may not be able to do a complete analysis. So I think this interest in looking at the relationship between technology and institutions in water management, um, this whole idea of taking a social constructivist lens, looking at
Mm-hmm.
how people relate to water, right? What people's day-to-day relationship with water is, what kinds of struggles they face, what they do to improve their access to water, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this kind of a social technical lens of looking at water, looking at both at the technologies and the institutions and the relationship between them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this I developed during my PhD days, and since then it has informed my approach to my teaching, to my research, to my capacity building, to my interest in the classroom, and so I think that's how it started. And that's how it shaped up.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Because when I started dwelling into the water sector, I think you were one of the early scholars whom I started referring. So, I mean, for me, you were like, then you were God and now you are a friend. So it's like a big, big achievement for me. So I'm talking about 1998, 99, when I started my journey with lakes and, what to read. Yeah, because in architecture planning, we did not have much scholarship developed around water bodies.
Right.
So there was a slight shift into the social sector naturally, because what you read shapes you.
Yeah.
So I read your recent wonderful two of your articles. So I'm just curious. That's my second question. Also, about your current engagements. What are you cooking these days?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So I'm currently involved in one of the projects, which I think is quite closely connected with what we want to talk about, which is about improving the presence of women in the water sector, right? So, so this goes back to my association with Saki Waters, yeah, as part of their Sava Fellows program,
Yes,
which tries to bring in more female students at the
yes,
master's level into the water curricula, into the water training, but also train them to do more interdisciplinary water work.
yes.
So it all started with four institutes in South Asia with a very strong, say, engineering bias
Hmm.
towards water studies. And it all started about almost 2 decades ago, trying to reorient their curricula to more
Yes.
interdisciplinary curricula and also bring in more women. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
currently involved with the project, which is looking at what effects has so many years of
Hmm.
training young female students to
Mm-hmm.
do interdisciplinary water studies has on the water sector, right? So there is
Mm-hmm.
this debate about the low presence of women in
Hmm.
engineering,
Yes.
and it's been a very old debate. It goes back to
Yes.
feminist scholarship, to the discourse on gender and technology, and then
Mm-hmm.
there are studies which show that over the years, women's enrollment in engineering has increased actually,
Yes.
right? And the question that we need to engage is that are those women engineers actually coming into the water sector?
Yes.
right? And
First
if they
is
are,
entering into, and then whether the retention is there.
exactly, right? So if there are more women engineers trained over the years, right, then are they coming into the water sector? And if yes, then what kind of work are they doing, and what has been the effect of so many decades of gendering water science research in South Asia? So that is one of my current engagements. Then I have continued my work on the peri-urban, yeah, and
Yes.
now more looking at issues of how climate extremes affect
Mm,
the peri-urban context. So my one of my recent research is on the effects of climate extremes on peri-urban flooding.
mm,
So we talk about floods in cities, and
mm,
that gets a lot of attention because they are cities, right? So we talk about flooding
mm,
in Chennai, we talk about flooding in Bangalore because of
mm,
heavy rainfall. But there is one issue that still doesn't receive the same attention, which is about the same effects being experienced by peri-urban populations.
mm,
Yeah, who receive the urban waste, who are the recipients of all kinds of or different forms
mm,
of ecological footprint of the city, and then
mm.
the effects of these getting exacerbated by climate extremes. So I think these are two of my say broad current engagements that I'm working on.
Interesting. How quite interesting. And we are trying to get more of your scholarship and your advisory, and even you as our advisor, to get as much as we can, as we tried from World Water Week event and also Wiki event. So we really hope that it goes even deeper with us. So that brings me to my next question here on, when we often talk about women professionals in the water sector. First of all, water sector looks at women in a from the very different lens. The whole vulnerability lens comes in picture, and then everything is done geared towards that. Here in this research, we are focusing on women professionals who work towards those vulnerable communities, and that is not necessarily women. But
Yeah.
I'm just trying to correct this myth which we have. So, women in water, the general perception in the society is that those women carrying water on their head.
Yeah.
And here in Wiki Water Resource Council, we are looking at the women who are working for the community, not necessarily women. So, when we come across lives of professional women, and it's about women in every sector, it's not about water. Many a times we see there are a lot of challenges for women to really conduct their professional services often. I mean, and that's where you can also relate with, there is intake of people and how much is the retention when they go out. So I'm just trying to understand the life of women is very complicated because they have the personal commitments attached to it. How is the life of other genders? Because because we are really not talking about gender as such in this research, but because you are also a gender specialist, I just need to understand, Vishal, as a human being, how do you juggle your personal professional life? Because every woman I have spoken to, at every point in time, they have to make this decision. Today what?
Yeah.
Personal, professional. So are other genders also doing it every day? If yes, I'm sure they are. But we are particularly interested to know how Vishal is managing. And today is a
Yeah.
classic example because this is the first time we are having this conversation, not on a regular time. So I'm
Yeah.
curious. And if you don't mind, if you would like to share, how do you juggle your professional and personal life? Over to you.
Yeah. So I think that so yeah. So I think that there's a kind of a gender bias here when we say that
Mm.
women need to juggle their personal and professional lives. I think everybody has to do that. So
Yes.
you know what? So my mother is in the hospital right now.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear this.
Yeah,
And
but
I'm
she luckily she's recovering. She's recovering and she's well, right? And so I was with her in the hospital till last night, and then I came home, and my sister's there now, and I'm here with you,
Hmm.
talking about women and water and so on. So I think this is a very good example of how
Yes. Yes.
also men juggle personal
Yes.
with professional lives, right? And I think also more so now with the nuclear family kind of
Yes.
setup. Yes, I
Yes.
think responsibilities on men have also increased.
Yes.
Earlier, there were others in the family who would take care of responsibilities, which now have to be shared essentially between the husband and the wife.
Yes.
Hmm? So I think so. This is also an aspect of changing gender relations.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
so men taking on responsibility at home, which they haven't done maybe 2 generations ago or 3 generations ago.
Yes.
Right. So I think this is one. So there is a constant juggling of personal and professional. And I think you reach a point in your career when you have to make those decisions every day.
Yes. And this is
Right.
exactly what I hear from every woman, you know.
Yes, exactly. So today, so if my mother is home and she needs medical attention, and if I have a class in my institute, then what time should I leave for the campus so that I can first attend to this, right? And then go into my class, right? So I think so these kind of decisions about balancing work and home have to be made by everybody, right? And possibly every day.
Hmm.
And I think perhaps the way to do this is like at this point in time, what is it that really needs your attention the most?
Yes. Live
Well,
by
what
the
is
day.
it that, so if you didn't do this, then what would happen?
That opportunity cost.
On the other hand, like, so if you, on the other hand, if you didn't do this, then what would happen? You know, something like that. So I think that is the way that that I personally look at this issue now. So in the sense of like, so if there is a meeting, then if you didn't go for the meeting, then what would happen?
So you
Right?
are already calculating the impact and everything.
So how central are you to the meeting? Right? If on the other hand you stayed home and you did this something like this, you know, then what would happen? So I think these kinds of decisions. But for instance, a class only you can take.
Yes.
You can't skip that. So that you have. So I think these kind of decisions you have to take about, balancing your personal and your professional lives every day.
Very interesting, because when we talk to women and we talk about professionalism and leadership, this question goes much deeper, and you are one of the classic example to understand what I'm going to say now, that women at some point in time they reach that threshold to take a decision to just drop out, drop out of the professional commitments, because for everyone family is a priority, and it
Yes.
should be. And that has been one of the key reasons for not being able to sustain their work. And one of the time which is very commonly documented in most of the scholarship is becoming mother.
Yeah.
But we have also seen getting married, changing places, then after many years losing confidence, and all those coming back is a challenge, and enabling and all those kind of things. I think you know much better than me. But so it goes much deeper when we talk about it. And of course, every day I completely agree with you. We all have to make those choices. So let me come to the last question of this section, which is very simple for you. But certain things which in your work you find quite intriguing or interesting, and certain things which you think are very challenging in the water sector to keep doing, I mean, as researchers, I'm sure you uh, agree with it that we have to be naggingly going after something to love it or
Yeah.
do it for forever. But I'm sure there are moments when we think, kahan phas gaye? So I would like to know from you, what are those moments for Vishal as a human now, which he enjoys doing in the water sector, and some things which you really think it's a mess.
So Mansi, so before that, let me just come back to the point that you were making earlier, right? About women reaching that threshold and making a decision finally to drop out of the career.
Yes.
But you know what? This is also a gender thing, that in our society, men don't have that choice.
That's a very good perspective. And I think we had a discussion when we met last time in
Yeah.
Gurgaon as
So
well. Men cannot cry. They don't have
men
choice.
cannot leave their job and say, I'm giving up my career.
That's a very valid point.
Yeah. Right. So I think so it works both ways.
Yes.
Maybe women eventually feel pressured to leave their job, but I'm not sure that in our society men always have that choice. I mean, you can always decide to break a gender stereotype, right?
Yes, I think it's extremely
But
important.
it doesn't always work that way. So yeah, and so this act of balancing work and life and goes on forever and ever. That's true, right? Now, what is it that I find interesting about work in the water sector? So let me come back to the question about women and water and how we talk about it and how I got into it. Hmm. So I never started off as a gender person. I never started my career. Yeah, I never. I also didn't start by going to the field with a gender lens.
Yes.
But when I was doing my fieldwork on water, it always came up.
But you are among the most engendered scholar, I must say, in the country.
Yes. So, but there's an interesting story to it, which is that I never started off deliberately with a gendered lens. So I never went to the field prepared asking questions on gender. Yeah, but it always came up.
Yes.
Yeah, and that is what I started getting intrigued by. That there were certain patterns in what I was seeing about men and women and their differential relationship with water. So for me, the gender and water journey was the reverse way. I started with experiencing things
more
in
grounded.
the field. It's more grounded, exactly. So typically one would start as a student taking a course on gender and development, taking a course on gender rights and
go with that lens.
taking gender and water, and then going to the field with that lens and then looking at it.
More prejudiced then.
Because then you've already, in a way, conditioned your mind to see it. Right. Okay. But that's what conceptual lenses do. So in my case, it was never like that. I went to the field, and whenever I was studying whatever aspect of what, there was always a gender dimension to it that would surface without my consciously investigating. And that's how, I started consolidating my ideas on gender and water. And then at the Terry School of Advanced Studies, I was invited to teach a course on gender rights and equity in water management. And teaching that course really gave me an opportunity to consolidate my ideas on gender and to engage with the literature on gender and water. And then I got opportunities to train the SAVA fellows on gender and water.
Yes.
Then I did an assignment with
When we met first time.
That's when we interacted. You were there at Saki Water at that time. Then I got this assignment with ISIMOD, looking at gender and social inclusion in the curricula of the HUC members. So and that's how over time, that's how all the thinking on gender and water, started taking shape. Okay. So, and then I concluded that gender was so basic to something like water that you could not study any dimension of water governance, access, distribution, water infrastructure, technology, dams, protests, environmental protests, right? Without taking a gender lens. So some people say that, well, then why just only gender? There are so many other axes of social differentiation. So there's caste, race, ethnicity, but that's true. So, perhaps it's best to make sense of this using an intersectionality lens. So it's not just differences between men and women, but also differences within different categories of women. Right. So I think that's how. And then I started engaging with the literature on gender, then the women and development discourse, the gender and development discourse, and then now the gendered vulnerability to climate change impacts, water-induced hazards, and so on and so forth. So that's how my journey on gender and water started. Now the problem, my concern is that still in the water sector, we don't talk as much as we should about the institutional.
Why we are doing these kind of conversations, I will be very honest on that.
Sorry?
That's why we are engaging in these conversations.
Yeah. So, we somehow think that the dominant discourse around water still sees it as a physical problem.
Yes. Not a social problem. That's a completely different discussion.
Yes, so we assume that more water means less water crisis, means less water scarcity. Okay.
Simple mathematics people are using,
So I think that and scholars who work on scholars, academics, development practitioners who work on the institutional and social dimension of the water have been saying this for a long time, actually.
Yes.
So when I started my water career, like about 2 decades ago, there were people who were saying this then also. Like I started my work reading many papers who were making these arguments only. But somehow I think that we don't emphasize that it's not just about physical availability, but there are governance issues, there are institutional issues, there are issues of unequal access. So that even if you had more water, let's suppose you managed to save 100 units of water. And the question is, who will get those 100 units of water?
Uh,
Huh? So
the
there will
problem
always
still remains then. That's what.
exactly, yes. So what we call the water crisis is not experienced by everybody.
Yes,
The people who live in gated communities, people who live in high rises, they don't experience a water crisis. Hmm? Or maybe occasionally do when no, when the supply is shut off. But by and large, they don't.
they don't.
If you live in a prime location, yeah, you're not necessarily a victim of water crisis. But there are some people who experience it on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm.
So I think challenging this kind of narrative
Hmm.
that our crisis is predominantly a physical crisis is still important.
Is a challenge. Is a challenge.
It's also a challenge. And sometimes I wonder whether this crisis is repeatedly presented like this,
Hmm.
hmm, force us or to blind us
Hmm.
to other issues, which
The
you need more courage to engage with.
Yes, it has to do with, I think, our science and scientists to be a little bit more, bold enough to come out and be vocal and having more decision-making positions and all. And that brings me to the next section of questions, to be honest, because we are focusing specifically on women. But as you rightly mentioned, that still there is a gap between social and technical aspects of water. Then once the social aspect is discussed, then I think gender, women,
Ah,
because before women, gender has to be discussed, and then woman is going to come as one of the genders. That brings me to the next question here, where we are talking about the presence and participation of women professionals in the water sector. You know, as I started, sorry, in the beginning, when we talk about women in water, our lens is again very different, So the global statistics and the national statistics are also different, and you are much aware about it. The global statistics is 5 in 1 professional, and we are doing much worse than that in Indian context. However, I feel a little bit more empowered when I am looking into and fetching and fishing women professionals across the country through this initiative and campaign, I must say, a mega campaign to get more women. What do you think is the reason? We have touched upon it very, softly in previous conversation we just had on intake and coming out and retention. Sorry. What do you think are the reasons that we are unable to come to gender parity, or I will say more presence of women and participation of women in the water sector professionally? What are the key reasons, in your opinion?
yeah. So I mean, yeah. So there are many studies actually, right, that
Mm,
have tried to answer this question. And so, for instance, there's Margaret Swatwin's work, who really equates, who sees this issue more in terms of the fact that the water sector is seen as a technical sector, like you're talking about, and engineering has,
mm,
historically been the prerogative of men.
mm,
So that is, and if in India, if you go back to colonial times, it all
mm,
starts with how the water management, the whole domain of water management was seen as essentially an engineering exercise, right?
mm,
And the gender and technology literature, the gender and water literature draws parallels between, say, engineering and masculinity.
mm, mm,
So
mm,
this is one. And there are practical constraints about infrastructure, about a gender-sensitive workplace, gender-sensitive work environment, about
mm,
family pressures, etc., etc. Okay. But I think that so once I submitted a paper, yeah,
mm, mm.
for a journal on the same question, and I'm currently working on it.
Huh.
And the reviewer said that he raised a very good point that why do you assume
Mm.
that if there were more women in the water sector,
Uh-huh.
then women's water concerns will be
Huh.
better.
How interesting is that question?
So the reviewer said, and it got me thinking, the reviewer said that why do you assume that women who come into positions of decision-making authority will necessarily be sensitive to other women?
Mm,
And he said that women who would come into, say, engineering roles would be, socially elite, upper caste women,
yeah.
typically. Hmm? And what makes the author think
Mm,
that they will necessarily be sensitive, or that they will
mm,
necessarily respond to
mm, mm,
the concerns and challenges that rural women face in addressing the water crisis. You know, so this is one. So I think that is one question that, and sometimes I think I also think the other side to it is that sometimes this whole argument about having more women in the water sector is presented as a rhetorical one.
Okay. Fair
I
enough.
think
Yeah.
I think that often it acquires the status of a cliche.
Okay. So
Hmm?
it's basically those women saying who are already in the water sector then.
Maybe so, but I think one needs a more clearer, say,
Hmm.
argumentation
Yes.
of what would
Good
change
point. Huh.
if there were more women in the water sector.
Yeah, we can work on that hypothesis also, what will
Huh.
change.
So one can always argue that you need diversity, right?
Yes.
You need equality, right?
Yes.
But what would more women water professionals
Thing on the table.
bring on the table
Hmm.
that only male professionals cannot?
Cannot.
So I think this. So I'm not challenging the premise, but I'm
Yeah.
saying that this argument needs to be presented and articulated in a more nuanced way if it needs to get more buy-in.
Gets stronger also with these.
It gets stronger because so I once went to a conference in Nepal, and which was about women in science and engineering,
Mm-hmm.
and at one point I just felt that everybody was repeating the same thing
Uh-huh.
without actually demonstrating why. I mean, like, what would change?
Uh,
So if we had more women in the water sector, then we need
mm,
more like nuance analysis
yes.
of what it would do to the sector.
Mm-hmm.
So it would, of course, it would do something to the women. It would increase their exposure, visibility, right? It would bring a more diversity of maybe representation. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But then, what would it bring to the sector?
Yes.
So, what would more women do to the water sector differently that large numbers of men can't do?
And can't do.
So maybe that argument needs to be presented in a more nuanced way, in a more articulate way.
Okay.
And I
Once.
also have this issue that that sometimes maybe because the word women is simpler to use and understand than the word gender. But I always have a preference to talk about gender issues in the water sector than to talk about women um, because that's just women is just half the picture. And one could argue that if you want to bring in more women in the water sector, then it is, that it is masculinity that you have to tackle and not just women. So, yeah, so my own preference always is to use the word gender rather than the word women, because then you really take a systemic view of the problem. You're able to see that there's a problem of social relations, of social structure, and not just a problem of women. So the women are not the problem.
Very interesting point. Very interesting point. And actually, somewhere even in our work in this Wiki Water Resource Council, and also when I am also now these days giving a lot of motivational talks on women, I also end up talking about this whole masculine approach to water, vis-a-vis more men or women. It's about when women can be also taking decisions which are more masculine in nature or
Yeah,
more, I will say, I mean, again, it's a bias that we put technical things into more masculinity,
yeah,
and
yeah.
so we are always going to be looking at things through those lenses, and that's a limitation of putting ourselves in some categories. But let me come back to our questions, which are already structured here, but I still will have a question out of the list I have. And I'm going to ask it at the end because it's more of a scholarship question. So coming from the presence and participation of women in the sector, my next question is more on being a professional is one thing, and climbing the ladder of leadership is completely different, and it's pyramidal. And on top of that, leadership is not at a mercy of gender. There are some skill sets. A leader is a leader, no matter what. But when we look at lives of women, which is already less in the water sector, and then when we are taking that pyramidal look to the leadership, we find where, and in fact, I have written a paper from independence till now, how many women, in ministers who have worked on environment, water, all related to soft things. So I'm just curious to understand, and that brings our question, which we were talking earlier, reflecting on your life, this whole balancing act and things. But in this question, I wish to focus on those skill sets which makes a professional good leader, uh, and uh, and if maybe I would be able to then reflect later in our work and through Wiki Water Resource Council and all, are we embracing those skills? Do we have those skills? What is a good leader for Vishal? How do you look at a good leader? And we are focusing on water sector, of course.
Yeah, so I think it's all right. So very difficult question. And I think the most difficult you asked me in the in the last half an hour. So, but I think
I'm sorry.
a
Yeah.
good leader should be able to influence.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's a difference between being like in a formal leadership position,
Yes.
right? Like being the head of an organization,
Yes.
right?
We do mean that as well, by the way.
So, yeah, yeah, and leading without a formal position.
Yes.
Like you can lead teams of researchers, for instance, right?
Yes. Hmm.
Like you can groom groups of students and lead them as teams.
Sure.
Yeah,
Hmm.
which is very different from what you would do in a formal leadership role, where your mandate role
Yes.
is already predefined,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And you're going to be judged in your success in that role by in
Hmm.
relation to that predefined, say, mandate or role. So I think it's basically your ability to influence others, right?
Hmm.
And to be able to do it without having to use coercion or power.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm.
Which means that people see in you something that they find worth emulating.
Hmm.
Hmm? And then you become like an example or a role model for them,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And they're willingly and they're happy following, the path that you lead them onto.
Hmm.
So I somehow find that style of leadership more persuasive.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
That you have maybe some new way of thinking about water,
Hmm.
right? In a way, you're walking, the road less taken,
Hmm.
and something in your style is persuasive
Hmm.
and effective, and that encourages others to follow you without you coercing them to do
Yes, that's also the difference between boss and leadership, huh? Uh,
that. Exactly, that's the difference between being a boss
boss
and
and a
being a
leader.
leader. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Mm. Interesting. So, if we go by that notion, and if we when we read the literature on leadership a little bit, we find out that some people we say are born leaders. I mean,
yeah,
I can agree on that, but there are also some traits which we can learn as a pattern from the leadership, because
yes,
I'm also giving a lot of lectures on leadership, so I'm also reading the scholarship available into it. I wish to understand from you some skill sets which can be nurtured when we see some potential among people, and I'm sure it is possible because not everyone is born leader, but one can aspire and one can be trained. I mean, not literally trained, but some things which can be done. And do you think there are certain skills, tangible skills, which can be uh, given and made the person empowered to get those skill sets and be more aware about the strength they have inside? That's one thing which I am also considering, that if we can make them realize that you have leadership skill, that itself is a training which needs to be done. But I'm sure there are other skills which you think can be provided or supported with or motivated to the people. What are those things in your opinion?
yeah. Okay, so I think so. Let me relate this. Let me make this easier for me to
Yes.
answer by relating it to a specific context. So let's suppose you are training young students to be water
Yeah.
leaders,
Like the Sava leadership
like the
program.
Savile leadership program, right? So I think what has happened somehow is that the academic orientation I find increasingly becoming very quick fix.
Hmm.
Like
Yes.
students are made to sit in a talk on how to publish a paper in a high ranking journal.
Yeah. But then how can you teach how to become a leader?
No, that's what I'm saying. So I'm questioning that.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Like when we started our water career, we never
Yes.
sat through such talks,
No.
like how to publish a paper in a high-ranking journal.
No.
It was all learned on the way.
Yes.
It was learned by trial, by error, by getting review comments, rejections, everything, right? So there is a, so what I'm going to say is that there is no shortcut.
But there is in society urgency at this moment to do
Huh.
everything fast.
So what I'm trying to question is this kind of quick fix in academics, which thinks that there is a shortcut to everything. There are tips for something. There are tips for, publishing in a high-ranking journal. There are tips for writing your CV, tips for writing your bio data. Okay,
Yeah.
so everything has become so standardized, homogenized, quick fixes, right? And so, many years ago, I read this book by Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Okay. And he talks about, and I was very young at that point of time, and I was very intrigued. I was just starting my career, and he talks about the law of the farm. He says that, like, if a farmer wants a harvest, he has to sow at the right time, right? He has to irrigate at the right time. He has to deweed at the right time. So there is a natural process of doing something, a natural process of learning. So I think if you're training young students to be water leaders, then we need to emphasize this kind of law of the farm of cultivating yourself, of learning,
Yes.
assimilating the literature, writing summaries, articles, and developing that skill over a period of time.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So, so I think one thing that say potential water leaders need to be surely trained to do is how to make an argument.
Yes.
Right. How to. It's not about vocabulary. It's not about jargon, but it's really about the clarity of your thought process.
Yes, and taking a position. I mean,
and taking a position.
first of all, yes.
First of taking a position, yeah. But then, for that, you have to, of course, read widely.
Of course.
You have to read widely, right? You have to develop a skill of knowing what different people are saying about the subject.
Yes, so that you can refer to them. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, so I think a very basic skill. So when I used to teach young students, a very basic skill I used to, teach them is of making abstracts of articles.
Yes.
So when you read a paper, when you read an article, you make a 300-word summary of it, and you store it somewhere. Because otherwise, you have nothing to show yourself for the 1 hour that you spend reading that article.
Reading that.
Okay. So what I'm going to say is that we need to move away from this very quick fix-ish approach now in academics to a natural, gradual, slow process, of developing yourself and the skills that we try to give to water students, to future water leaders should be on lines of like, like how do you internalize what you read, for instance? How do you engage with the work of other scholars, right? How do you go back and forth between your empirics, like what you find in the field,
the ground,
and what has already been written on the subject? And it is that ability that enables you, that allows you to take a position.
Yes.
Or even if you say that, even if you say that research is a process of creating knowledge, then to identify that knowledge creation, to identify what new your work is adding to the water scholarship, you need to be sufficiently grounded in what people have said about it.
Yes.
So I think this whole ability to read other people's work, to assimilate it, to internalize it, and to engage with it is important. And and also, I mean, very basic thing. It's not about a course on communication. It's not about a communications. I would not use the word communications because it sounds very quick fixes. Yeah, but simply the ability to organize your thoughts, to to present what is going on in your mind and saying it clearly and loudly. So with some of my students, I used to say that if you have a research idea, why don't we just write 100 words on it? Like at this point of time, what are you thinking about your research in 100 words? Then you will know, like, do you know, are you clear about what you want to do? And the other thing I should say is that if you went home today and your grandmother asked you, What did you learn? What would you tell? Of course, these as grandmothers can be highly educated. That's not the point. But then let's suppose that you have
You
to
are able
explain
to
this.
articulate that. Yeah.
Exactly. Let's suppose you need to deconstruct this to somebody who's not an expert on the subject. Let's suppose you need to demystify this. Then what would you tell? So with my, more senior students who are in the service, I say that if you went home today and your son asked you, "Ke Papa's class mein kya padha?" Then what would you tell? So this ability to deconstruct, to demystify, what we're doing. I think that's very important also. Like a lot of the mainstream social science is quite loaded with jargon.
Yes,
And
the
if you
gender
have to,
itself, the gender itself is a jargon.
exactly, and if you have to, say, teach it to students who are absolutely new to the subject, like if you have to teach gender to students who have background in engineering, right? They can develop a mental block just reading a paper like that.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think it's very important also for academics, like all of us, to demystify the social sciences, to deconstruct, to present it in a form that it doesn't seem, daunting.
And it's not caged also. The scholarship has to be, very easy.
Exactly. And so that it becomes exciting and interesting for somebody. It becomes something that somebody who doesn't have any background in it can make sense of.
Yes.
And
doesn't feel intimidated and burdened.
Exactly. So he doesn't feel intimidated. He doesn't develop mental block. He
And also
doesn't shut his
relate,
mind to it.
can relate with what we are saying. I think for that we have to really reorient ourselves in writing and reaching out to people both ways in our text, in our speeches and everything. And I strongly believe leaders have to have good speech and vocabulary. Of course, you need them because then you can articulate it properly, and then goes back to reading and writing. So we cannot be speaking well unless and until we are reading and writing well. So these three are absolutely interrelated. So that brings me to the last section of our question and to you. And the last section starts with the role of platforms and networks and council, just like Water Resource Council. And I'm sure you are member of many associations and networks. You are advisor to many of them. I just need to understand from you now already being in in this Water Resource Council for 2 years, but it is important for younger generation as well as those who are now in the mid life of their water career. What merits they should look into these networks, and are there merits? Have you benefited out of it? Should they be part of it? Should they be not? And what should they expect from it? And things like that.
So
So
you're asking me, like, how do we
should
do
we
we see
join these
perceived
platforms
benefits
and
of being part of
networks and
networks?
councils? Does it help in your building up in your career, or because as women, it's a time crunch again, the balancing act, and I'm seeing how difficult it is to manage and maintain a council, but in general, the role of these councils and platforms and associations.
No, I think I think it surely helps. But of course, one has to, as you said, do a lot of juggling. Yeah, because you also need time
Yes.
To exploit benefits and opportunities that may
Yes.
come from being parts of the networks.
Yes.
So very often, so there's a network meeting, you want to go, but then you're bound up with other things. So that happens. Okay, but I think that without these networks, we would be worse off because we would be in our silos.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think these networks are important because they help us relate with others, but they also, help us place our own work in a larger context.
Yes.
Like where does this? So, for instance, if I do some work on gender and water, right, and I know that there's Wiki Water Resources Council.
Yes.
So for me, that is like one concrete evidence that there is a growing presence of women in the water sector.
Yes.
And the Monday Munchings that you do, and all the women that you brought in on each of these,
Reaching
on each
90,
of
yeah,
these once a week,
95. We are not
95, right? Okay. I mean, so there is concrete evidence that yes, that that there are 95 women there, 95 women professionals making a dent on the water sector. They may not necessarily have been trained. Interestingly, they're not all of them are trained as water engineers, right? They're not trained as water professionals.
No.
Right. So other than the efforts that many organizations are making through maybe interdisciplinary water resource education or bringing in more women in the water sector, there is a large chunk of women water professionals, right, doing work in water. And so for me, there is concrete evidence there.
And working in diverse sectors. And that
in
is
diverse sectors and in different kinds of capacities. So
Yes.
research, training, capacity building, advocacy, very grassroots community mobilization. Okay. So I think what the way these networks help is that they help you contextualize your work, right? And you can see your own position in relation to a bigger picture.
Yes.
Right?
And also, I personally feel that being part of a mass where I personally feel stronger rather than being alone, you know? I mean, that's
No. So as I said, so I mean, it can be crippling and dangerous to be in a professional silos. But I think that one needs to be part of these networks to relate, to contextualize, and also, you know, the other thing I feel important that that all the knowledge that we produce, right, all the research that we do, has to be read by somebody.
Yes, you have to have that the cloud of people.
Exactly. I mean, this is not like food that you'll cook because you're going to eat it.
Yes.
Right. So if the knowledge that you produce, if the papers that you write, nobody reads them, right? Then it's much more difficult to assess what contribution you have made.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But let's suppose people read the work that you write, right? And it shapes their thinking, right? Or let's suppose
they can leapfrog the knowledge.
Right. It shapes their thinking. It maybe it encourages them to do similar work, or it gives rise to new questions in their mind which they want to investigate.
Yes.
Okay. So that's when the research that we do becomes relevant.
Yes.
Otherwise, I mean, if you're going to spend, 2 years doing field work, right, and writing a paper in a high impact factor journal, fine, that's good enough. But if nobody reads it, if nobody finds it relevant, if it doesn't have any influence on anybody else's way of working, thinking, or doing, then there's no fun in it. Right. Okay. So I think these networks are also important to disseminate what you're doing. Like if you're a researcher,
yes.
So these networks are important to share the knowledge that you produce. Right. And I think that's the other way that these networks are important.
Yeah. So, somewhere we are also trying through our council and also through these Monday talkings, and you are also part of our Wednesdays, Fridays conversations and all. The whole idea of acknowledging and appreciating is also very motivating for us professionals. You know, if someone says that I read your work and it's nice work, sending my student to you, all these little things can make you work harder towards your own work. So it's very motivating, you know. Instead of you waiting, someone can also come to you, and at the small acknowledgement and appreciation goes very deep in your own way of working. And that's important for anybody to be in the network. And I think you rightly mentioned that you are otherwise in a silo, you know. So that brings me to a question again related to networks. So when people are joining these networks, I'm sure they have many questions about it, and they should. What to get from the network, which we discussed in brief, but it is also like a two-way process, you know, these networks. So what to offer, which is partly we just discussed sharing. But when you join any network or platform or council, I'm sure you are also talking about thinking about this give and take, you know. And with your deep knowledge and sensitivity towards gender, we reached out to you to become advisors. So now focusing on the Wiki Water Resource Council, we would like to know what kind of activities we should be organizing, because we are going to soon close this whole Monday thing and start working on it. So this is like a gathering of knowledge and scholarship to see what we can do and other things. like regional workshop. You were part of that regional workshop, so just one example. But what kind of activities Wiki Water Resource Council specifically should be taking up, and what can be offered by advisors and what can be offered by other council members? How should we operationalize this whole working on the ground, working with the people? We have tried out few methods, few approaches, but since we are having this conversation with all of you, we are also trying to gather new methods, new approaches, new ideas. So over to you.
Yeah, so I think one is to, make visible maybe um, a greater diversity of women leadership.
Okay.
So, for instance, there will be many sort of, we use a word called unsung hero. Ah, so let's make it unsung heroine now.
Yes.
Yeah. So, of course, so there are, educated, women, professionally qualified, trained women doing different kinds of things in the water sector.
Yes.
Hmm? But there are also maybe more rural women. Hmm? We can reach out through NGOs who are working at the grassroots level, working in mobilizing communities, organizing women around watershed conservation. But I think also making visible a greater diversity
Yes.
in the leadership profile of women.
Yes. Like we had this conversation with Jal Saheli people, and it was so enriching. Of Bundelkhand, the whole Jal Saheli, community.
Yes.
And yesterday only we had a meeting with Seva Mandir in Udaipur to really find out if we can do something, because they have mapped many women leaders in Rajasthan.
Something like that, right? Also, I think that, I think stronger partnerships between academics and NGOs.
Okay.
In this, I tell you what, for instance, so academics and NGOs both have certain strengths. NGOs are very active in the field. Okay. They have huge manpower, large teams, strong field presence, right? Academics are good at maybe, writing, articulating, presenting a point of view.
Yes.
But maybe a stronger partnership and collaboration in terms of, what we call process documentation research.
Yes.
Right? I did this for the Navjot India Foundation. Chandni, Chandni, right?
We met there also, no? In the
we met there, of course, you know the. So I did a small study for them, right? Trying to document their activities in 4 villages in Sona, right? How they mobilize communities around watershed conservation, right? Also, the impacts of the Unnati initiative. So I think stronger partnerships between academics and NGOs, where academics can give knowledge support, right? Documentation support, and get a support in making the efforts of some of these NGOs visible.
Visible, yes.
Or even integrating it with like the global literature on the subject.
Yes, yes. And I think there are many council members also who may be interested and who can take up these kind of tasks, to bridge the gap and also bring them closer, the science and the society,
Yes. Yeah. So I think this kind of partnership with where academics can give knowledge support to NGOs in terms of documenting their activities, making them more visible, or integrating them with the global, say, literature on the subject. I think that's the other way. That's the other way. So I think these two things. And third thing, I think you can take a call on whether you want to get into this, capacity building kind of grooming of.
That was the question on how to groom leadership, cultivate it.
Because that's very fascinating. And I mean, that's a very interesting thing to do.
To work. I feel it's going to be effective if we do it at, 10. When we had discussion on should we go to schools and start talking about what it is to be in the water sector alone, just talk about it and have more people coming into the water sector. So these kind of things we are discussing. I mean, let's see how we go.
Yeah. So I think that's the other thing, like training, capacity building, and and the other thing that I feel quite interested in, which I'm not sure if you want to take it up, is the whole area of water resources education.
Close to my
and it's
heart,
changing
Vishal,
nature.
close to the heart, what the pedagogy of water education, how it should
Yes.
be taught.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
So
my pain as well as my passion, how it should be taught.
yes, right. And of course, in the last few decades, we've seen lots of new water programs
Mm,
come up, different
mm,
from the conventional engineering programs. What is their future? Are they going to survive? Where is the alumni of these programs going?
mm,
Is there a
mm.
long-term demand for such professionals? So these, I think, some questions that should continue to engage our attention.
I'm sure we have a long way to go to talk about the pedagogy of water, because we are also experiencing the changing time of water education and even water crisis for that matter. Uh, that brings me to the last question, but I will still have one more question, which is not part of it, but I'm very intrigued to really ask that question. And it's of course related to you being specialized and spend your life, dedicated your life on it. My last question to you is on engendering the water sector in the coming days. I'm sure because gender itself is a myth, I must say, the whole discourse and also biased. But I'm sure people like you and me would like to live a day in our own lives where we don't have to discuss gender. It's just we are human beings. Here is a water problem. Let us solve it. Can we
Yeah.
come to that, arrive to that? And for that, again, it will be good to reach out to younger generation, to classrooms, schools, and all. So we would like to get your message on the conduct of working in the water sector for the younger generation. What they should do, that the engendering is natural. I mean, you did talk about it in the beginning, that engendering becomes a natural process in their own lifetime, in their own work process. Like we are making extra effort right now, by talking about it. And that's my last question. I'm going to it to you. But currently, your message to the younger generation, first, to be in the water sector, what it is to be, and how should they conduct themselves in the natural so that engendering happens.
Yeah. Okay. So to think through this one. So what is my message to the younger professionals? So um I think one is that one is to know why you're there,
Hmm.
yeah, and what difference you want to make. Um, Other thing is to be is to be open to different kinds of perspectives
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
on water. So like I often say in my class, that if you put an economist, an anthropologist, a lawyer, and an engineer in the same room and ask them to talk about water,
Hmm.
they would all say very different things,
Hmm.
right? So I think one is to develop the maturity to be able to understand different kinds of perspectives,
Yes.
huh? Other than your own,
Hmm. And accept also some things and question.
and accept in question. I think that is very important, right? Because the whole narrative about interdisciplinary water education, right,
Hmm.
is presented in a very say vague word called
Hmm.
holistic perspective.
Yes.
Right. So
Now the holistic is
I don't know what is
WHO.
sometimes you don't know what is holistic perspective is, right? So you have to sort of deconstruct this holistic perspective.
Yes.
Okay. And I think the way to put it is to be open,
Hmm.
right, to different ways of thinking about water.
Hmm.
Yeah. And to recognizing that there's some aspect of water that maybe your own professional training
Hmm.
has not yet conditioned to see,
See. Hmm.
right? So there's a very interesting book by Pranav Burthan called Conversations Between Economists and Anthropologists,
Okay.
right? So economists and anthropologists, they both have similar concerns
Hmm.
about society,
Yeah,
but
but
they approach it in very different ways,
hmm.
in epistemologically very different ways.
Hmm. Hmm.
Hmm. And this translates into maybe the different kinds of questions they ask, but also the different kinds of methods they use.
Hmm. Hmm.
Huh? Right. So I think it's that I think it's being open to different kind of perspectives. It's like they say that you like I used to tell my students that when you go to the field,
Hmm.
to study water, you should go with a blank slate. Don't go with your preconceived notions about what you think is happening there. Yeah, because every context is different, every reality is different. And that holds very much for gender also. Gender is highly contextual. Like who does what in any society at any point of time is highly contextual. So if you went to study gender with your preconceived notions of, the man is the bread earner and the woman is the homemaker, right? That will not get you very far. So I think one is to look at water on a blank slate. So there is as much of unlearning as there is learning every day. So my economics, my graduation is economics honors, right? And my PhD was anthropology and irrigation.
So you have already.
Okay, so when I went to the field, a lot of the things that were in my mind because of my B honors economics training were absolutely challenged.
I'm sure.
About property rights, about how farmers make wastewater, right? About how only the correct price will generate incentives to conserve water. All that kind of thinking, which was so deeply embedded in my mind because of my BA honors economics training, was completely challenged when I went to the field, right? So I think that's it. And how do you? Okay, the question of how should young professionals, approach the gender issue, like so that it doesn't sound like a gender issue. So I think that again, start your work on a blank slate, approach the field with a free mind, and so there's a Zen parable about a monk, right, who goes to his master, and he says that I want to learn something. But I know this, 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 I know this. So the master says that the master takes a cup and he starts pouring tea in it. Huh? And then the cup gets full and the tea starts overflowing. So the disciple says, what are you doing? He says that, you are like this overfull cup. Yeah. You are telling me that you know this, you know this, you know this, you know this, but you don't demonstrate that there's anything empty in your cup that I can fill it with.
Fill it up.
So a lot of the learning process is about emptying your cup. Right. And Robert Chambers used to use the word normal professionalism, that, but the water professionals look at the water world through their professional training, the lens of their professional training. And that blinds them to many things that are important out there, right? So I think always go to the field, approach a subject on a blank slate, with a fresh mind, and be open to perspectives other than
That's a very important message, I think. And that message also helps me ask my last question out of the question list I have, is when we are, trumpeting so much about women in water and this and that, do you think actually we are making it more obvious of the discrimination? Is that going to help us reduce the gap? Is that going to make people realize it? Where are we heading in this direction? I mean, in this matter, are we really naturally moving towards engendering? It's what's because you have been following this subject for a long time. So I'm just curious, and for me, it's something very new. And when I am into it, I'm realizing, and after facing problems in my own career of being woman in the sector for nearly 20 years, and now in a position to reflect upon and in a position to see some things for future, aspire some things for future for good for the society, not literally for career. But it's just, this notion of uncertainty. Are we walking towards the right path, or we are actually creating more problems for women in the water sector? I mean, what is your take on
you.
initiatives like this? It's a
Yeah.
very
So
sensitive question, but I mean, as a leader, personally, I mean, by position, I don't know by character or not, but I'm always asking this question to myself. Am I creating more problem? Or is it really a small step towards what we are trying to really look at as a problem and solve it?
Yeah. No, so I don't think that you're creating more problems. I think that you are just making a problem that exists more visible.
Okay. And I feel that then it is a contribution.
That's a contribution. Yeah.
Yes.
So all said and done, I mean, gender and women in water is quite complicated,
Yes.
at times
Agreed.
contentious. For
Yes.
every argument that you make, there's a counter argument.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you look at the literature, there are different kinds of arguments on the same subject, right? So some people say that you need to, give more responsibilities to women, for instance, in local water management committees. Some people say, no, they already have so much to do at
Mm.
home and at farm, and then you're giving them one more thing to do. Is that fair without
Also,
giving them
women have
control and
come up with
authority
this
and power?
problem.
Okay.
Women also have come
So,
up with.
yeah. And yes. And so there are apparently no like clear-cut answers.
Mm.
Yes. There are no blueprints. So maybe I think one has to understand again, maybe what is happening in a specific context, right? And how does it align with how we think about equity?
Mm.
Hmm? And then in that context, what is the best that can be done
Mm.
by way of research, by advocacy, by capacity building to change the situation?
Mm.
So, like what I once wrote a short piece, on the topic, which I also shared in the WFW forum.
Yes.
And one of the somebody I know for a long time said that, Vishal, that we have been saying this for such a long time,
Mm.
and nothing is happening.
Mm.
So she said that, what you've written today, we've been saying this for like 2 decades now.
Mm.
Hmm.
Mm.
So, I mean, that's a valid argument, but then maybe that's not a good enough reason to stop saying.
Yes, of course. Yes, absolutely. And the fact that we still have to say means no, we still need to bring a change.
Yeah,
You
but
know?
I think the problem arises when we simplify the thing,
Yeah, and
or
I
when
think
we
also
present it as a rhetoric
pessimistic way
or
of
as a
looking
cliche.
at it. Yeah, and also
Ah,
pessimistic way of looking at things. If things are not changing, why should we work on it? I mean, we have to bring a change. That's why we are working on it.
yes, exactly. Okay, but as I said, that one has to guard against the dangers of being rhetorical.
Absolutely. Yes, that's the
Yeah,
word.
because if you sound rhetorical and cliche, then your argument doesn't gain momentum. Then it's
Mm,
very difficult to convince people of what you're saying.
yes.
So simply saying that we need more women in the water sector
Mm-hmm.
hmm,
Mm.
sounds become start sounding like a cliche.
Huh. And I think you had a good argument in this. What difference it is going to bring bring a
Ah,
change?
right. So what is it? So what is it? One would say that you never asked this question about men.
There
so,
there is enough disaster done by
so
them.
that's fine. But the point is fine. But so men have been there historically. They've been there.
We would like to
Right?
do men in
And in
water
the
also.
South Asian context, you have to go back to the colonial times, actually,
Yes. And
right?
even
To trace
before.
this connection between masculinity and engineering and water management.
Mm,
Huh? So that is done,
mm,
right? At this point of time, what is the best that we can do? Hmm.
great. Yeah.
Right. So, as I said, that maybe one has to guard against, sounding rhetorical or cliche, but one has to make maybe nuanced arguments about what we're trying to change and what difference it will make to bring more women in the water sector. You can do it through literature, you can do it through cases, you can do it through demonstrating evidence, but maybe that is what.
Yeah, interesting. Uh, Thank you so much. I'm sure you had a good time discussing, and I know there are difficult questions here, but these are questions which are pondering into the whole sector, and it has been fished out after thorough study to have this open-ended structured question. And the last question was more of an ethical and self-correction question, not meant to be asked to everyone, but just because we are discussing and you are there, and I could open my heart to you to ask this question to know if somewhere we have to really be very cautious about and all, and that's important, reflection on it. Thank you so much, Vishal. Thank you so much. I really felt the conversation flowing like water, and I hope you felt the same and enjoyed this conversation. May you remain an inspiration to me. I mean, I started my career reading you, to be honest, but definitely many people look up to you as inspiration. We are really grateful to have learned about your water endeavors, because I can read your paper, but I could never learn when did you start, how did you start. These one-to-one conversations are extremely enriching as well as encouraging for people like us. Meanwhile, we shall continue with the Monday Munching with Women for Water every Monday at 5 p.m. IST, and look forward to learning more from other women and other people who look at this sector very closely, this aspect very closely. You may please follow us and our activities at our social media platforms. For now, really grateful to you, Vishal. Thank you so much. And please take care. And we can continue talking about it some other time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mansi, for having me here. Enjoy talking to you. Thanks a lot. And all the best with all your efforts.
Thank you. Thank you so much.